is William here, and today we're going to be going over the ES1 synthesizer that's included with Logic. It looks complex, but we've actually gone over a lot of these parameters before. This synthesizer just gives us a lot more flexibility with some of these parameters. So starting right off the bat, on the left side here, we have the transpose buttons again. So the default sound right now, it sounds like this. And if we change this transpose button to a 2 instead of a 4, it's a much higher pitch. And then 8, 16, 32 are all lower pitches. Definitely mess with that. It's vital to how it will sound in the end. Moving on, we now have 2 oscillators. So each of these knobs controls the waveform of each oscillator. I'm going to turn this second one off right now, and we're just going to focus on the first one. So right now the first one just sounds like this. It's just a basic saw wave, and we can change it to a triangle wave, a square wave, or modulation of square wave. I'm going to put it back to a saw wave, though, while we're going through this synthesizer. Now, focusing just on the sub oscillator, we have, it's the same kind of setup. We have different square waves, we have some pulse waves, we have a noise oscillator. This one right here is just off, so there's no sub oscillator if it's set to that. And then actually this one right here is EXT, which stands for external input, which with up here on the side chain, we can actually set an input to come into this synthesizer, and we can have the sub oscillator be an external input. So that's pretty cool. Right now I'm just going to set it back to this square wave that it was, and that's what the sub oscillator sounds like by itself, and some of these variations. Moving on, we have this mix fader, which at the very top, all we're going to hear is this first oscillator. At the very bottom, all we're going to hear is this sub oscillator. And then in the middle, we're going to have a perfect mix of the two. So this is just a fader that you can mix the values of each of the oscillators. If you want more sub, or if you want more of the wave oscillator, you can adjust for that. Next up, we have right here this drive effect, which it's like an overdrive. We've seen this before. It affects the drive of the cutoff, and it adds a bit of distortion to it depending on how much you use. Then we've seen this before. We have a cutoff slider. Before it's been knobs, and then we also have a resonance slider, which is the boost and cut of the frequencies around the cutoff frequency. And then we have this right here, which is key, which we've actually seen this before on another synth, except it was just buttons rather than a slider. If you have key all the way up, the cutoff is actually going to follow the notes that you're pressing. So as you're going up the keyboard, the cutoff will move up with the notes you're pressing. If you have this all the way down to 0, the cutoff is not going to move. So once you get to the higher notes, it's gonna be much quieter because it's going to be cutting off those frequencies. So that's what this slider is. And then this thing in the middle is actually just different types of cutoffs. So right now we're on the 24 dB fat cutoff, and we have a classic, an 18 dB, and a 12 dB. These are just, so right now the 24 dB sounds like this, and then 12 sounds like this. So you can already see the difference right there. And then we have these two other ones. But these are just different modes of the cutoffs. They're different, shapes of how it cuts off. So definitely mess with those. Those are important to how it will sound in the end. Moving on to our amplifier section over here, we have some velocity controlled parameters again, which we've seen this before. This slider right here is ADSR via velocity. So what that means is this top arrow, the hardest we press a note, the highest value, 127 velocity, is going to be this this value on the ADSR. The softest note we press, or the lowest note at 1 value, or 0, I guess, will be this value. So the wider or the further apart these two arrows are, the more dynamic range in the velocity you'll have. So you can see the attack's kind of a little bit weirder when we hit the keys very softly. So that's what this one is. The next thing we have to go over is we have the amplifier, which the lower parameter, or the lower arrow, excuse me, it's the same concept as this slider over here. The lowest one is the softest note. The highest one is the hardest note that you can press. And instead of controlling the ADSR, this controls the actual volume. That's why the softer notes are quieter and the harder notes are louder. You can make them the same, and then it's the same level throughout, no matter how hard or soft you press it. Next, we have these ADSR buttons. We have A gate R, ADSR, and gate R, which these are just buttons to bypass certain parts of the ADSR, essentially. So if we just wanted the attack and release to control our envelope, our sound here, we could just have it to A gate R. If we wanted the regular default ADSR, we'd have it set to ADSR. And then if we just wanted the release to affect our sound, we'd want gate R. So those are some things to keep in mind. Moving on to the bottom section of the synth, we have stuff we've seen before. We have the glide, which the lower the value, the less time it will take to transfer from one note to another. If you put it up a little bit, you'll have a kind of sliding effect from one note to the next. Then we have the low frequency oscillator. This right knob that says rate is the speed at which the LFO will play. On the left side, we have synced integers that it will play at, depending on your tempo of your session. So right now I could set it to 1/4 notes at 120 BPM, and that's how fast the LFO will play. Or on the right side, we have it set to the actual hertz that the frequency of the low frequency oscillator is. So you can get super precise with it on the right side, except it may not always be in time in that case. And of course, if you have it set to the middle, it's not going to play. There's not going to be no low frequency oscillator. Then this left knob here is the wave knob. It's similar to the oscillator knobs that we had up here, except instead of controlling the oscillators, this controls just it's essentially the same thing. It controls the oscillator of the low frequency oscillator. It changes the shape. We have a triangle, a descending saw wave, ascending saw wave, a square, and we got some pulse waves and stuff, and then we have external input again for this one. So those are really cool. Next, we have this slider, same principle as some of these velocity ones, except velocity does not control this one. What controls this one is if you have a MIDI controller that has a mod wheel, that's what this is controlled by. And this controls the intensity of the LFO based on what your mod wheel is at. So at the highest, your mod wheel will be the top arrow. At the lowest, your mod wheel will be the bottom arrow. and anything in between will be in the green space. Next, we have this thing called the router, which on the left side, it controls where the LFO goes. So we can have the LFO go to the pitch, the pulse width, the mix, the cutoff, the resonance, or the volume. And then on the right side, we have the mod envelope. So these buttons control where the mod envelope will control. So we can have, it control the pitch, the width, the mix, etc. And then going on to the mod envelope, some more features about the mod envelope. Over here we have intensity via velocity, which it's kind of exactly like this parameter, except instead of being controlled by a mod wheel, it's controlled by, yet again, the velocity. So again, the highest velocity will be all the way at the top, the lowest will be at the bottom. And then this mod envelope right here, it will determine how fast or how slow it attacks or decays, how fast or slow the mod envelope attacks or decays. And then again, we have our ADSR over here, our attack, decay, sustain, release. You should know what this is by now. And then moving on to the very bottom, the last few parameters of this, we have a fine tune drag box that we can drag around if we really need to fine tune it. And these are in cents, very small integer in pitch. And then we also have analog, which it adds a bit of an analog element to the sound, randomizing the pitch and things like that ever so slightly. The more analog percentage you have, the more you'll hear it. The bender range is how it's how much of a range the pitch bend will affect, depending how many semitones it will affect. The default is 2. Then we have the output level. The default was -3 dB for me. Of course, if your sound's a little loud, you can turn it down, or if it's a little quiet, you can turn it up a bit. Next, we have the voices, how many voices we want to play. Default was 16. You can go all the way up to 32 on this synth, which it'll sound very full. It might even sound muddied at that many voices. So I kept this at 16. And it sounds, just like that. Next, and last but not least, we have a chorus effect again, which we've seen before. Except this time, instead of having a knob or anything, we just have a couple presets here. So off is obviously not on. And then chorus 1 or C1 sounds like that. It sounds much wider. Chorus 2 sounds even a little bit wider than that. And then ensemble, it sounds very, very chorusy. It sounds very cool. So I know that was a lot to take in for this lesson. There was a lot of parameters we had to go over. You should have recognized some of these. I hope you mess with some of these and you get used to it. Because again, I say this after every video I do on the synthesizers. The more you use these and the more you play with these, the better you'll get at these, and the better you'll understand the parameters. So again, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Bye.